Permanence is something most people assume before they ever think to name it. It exists quietly in the background of everyday life, holding things in place. Homes feel stable. Relationships feel continuous. The future feels like an extension of the present. Even when change is expected, it is expected within boundaries. There is an unspoken belief that most things will still be there tomorrow. For Morty Smith, that belief erodes early. Impermanence does not arrive as a concept. It arrives as experience. Worlds collapse. Timelines reset. People disappear without farewell. Entire versions of life end not with tragedy, but with replacement. Something exists one moment and is gone the next, not because it failed, but because something else took its place. Morty learns very quickly that continuity is optional. At first, this knowledge unsettles him in ways he cannot articulate. He feels it as unease, as hesitation, as a strange reluctance to fully settle into moments that should feel safe. When something feels good, part of him waits for it to vanish. When someone feels close, part of him prepares for distance. Impermanence reshapes attachment quietly. Morty still forms bonds. He still cares. But he does so with an awareness that never fully leaves him. He knows that nothing guarantees preservation. Not love, not effort, not intention. He has seen too many things erased without reason to believe otherwise. This awareness changes how attachment feels in the body. Attachment becomes careful. Affection becomes measured. Joy becomes provisional. Not because Morty wants it to be that way, but because experience has taught him to expect loss. Loss not as exception, but as pattern. Loss not as tragedy, but as background condition. When nothing feels permanent, attachment becomes fragile by default. Morty begins to notice this fragility everywhere. In friendships that feel temporary even when they are kind. In routines that feel borrowed rather than owned. In moments of happiness that carry an aftertaste of impermanence. He does not ruin these moments deliberately. He simply cannot inhabit them fully without remembering how easily they could end. This does not make him cold. It makes him cautious. Caution becomes a way of protecting himself from the whiplash of sudden endings. If he never fully assumes continuity, loss will hurt less when it arrives. Or at least that is the hope. In practice, the hurt still comes. It just comes layered with resignation. Impermanence teaches Morty a difficult lesson, that attachment is always a risk. Every connection carries the possibility of disappearance. Every investment of feeling is a gamble against forces too large to negotiate with. In a universe that replaces realities as easily as it replaces tools, emotional permanence feels like a fragile illusion. Rick understands this intellectually. Morty feels it emotionally. Rick moves through impermanence with detachment. Morty moves through it with sensitivity. He experiences the constant turnover of existence not as freedom, but as erosion. Things do not build, they cycle. And cycles do not accumulate meaning the way continuity does. This makes Morty hesitant to imagine a future built on stability. He struggles to picture adulthood as something solid. If worlds can end without warning, what does it mean to plan? If people can vanish, what does it mean to rely? Impermanence reshapes not only how Morty attaches, but how he hopes. Hope becomes smaller, quieter, more immediate. He hopes for moments rather than lifetimes, for safety now rather than security later, for connection that exists fully in the present, without demanding permanence as proof of value. This is not defeat. it is adaptation. Morty learns to love without assuming forever. He learns to care without guarantee. He learns to treat moments as meaningful, even when they are fleeting. This skill keeps him from hardening completely, but it also keeps him exposed. Because caring in a world where nothing lasts means accepting grief as a constant companion. Morty accepts this slowly, reluctantly. He does not romanticize impermanence. He does not treat it as wisdom. He feels it as loss repeated often enough to become familiar. Familiarity does not make it easier. It only makes it expected. And expectation reshapes attachment profoundly. He becomes someone who holds people gently, aware of how easily they could slip away. He does not cling, but he does not detach either. He exists in a careful middle space, trying to honor connection without demanding that it endure. This balance is difficult, sometimes impossible. There are moments when impermanence overwhelms him, when the idea that nothing stays makes everything feel pointless, when attachment feels like an invitation to pain rather than meaning. In those moments, he flirts with detachment, wondering if caring less might finally offer relief. But detachment does not come naturally to him. Morty is not built to stop caring. Even when impermanence hurts him, he continues to form attachments. He continues to invest emotionally. He continues to feel loss when things end, even when he knew they would. This persistence reveals something important. Impermanence does not erase the need for attachment. It intensifies it. Knowing that nothing lasts makes moments feel sharper. It gives weight to presence. It turns attention into a form of respect. Morty learns that attachment does not need permanence to be meaningful. It needs sincerity. Sincerity is harder to maintain than indifference, but Morty chooses it anyway. When nothing feels permanent, attachment becomes an act of courage, not because it promises reward, but because it accepts risk. Morty accepts that risk again and again. Not loudly, not confidently, but persistently. He attaches knowing it may end. He cares knowing it may hurt. He hopes knowing hope may not be fulfilled. That choice does not protect him from loss, but it preserves something essential. In a universe that erases things effortlessly, Morty remains someone who treats moments as if they matter while they exist. He does not demand permanence as proof of value. He does not dismiss connection just because it might not last. He learns to live inside impermanence without letting it hollow him out. And that, quietly, reshapes who he becomes. Impermanence does not only change how Morty attaches to others, it changes how he relates to himself. When nothing feels stable, identity becomes provisional. Morty learns that who you are can shift depending on context, survival, and circumstance. He has seen versions of himself shaped by different worlds, different outcomes, different pressures. Some survive, some do not. Some make choices he never would have imagined. Others disappear before they can choose anything at all. This knowledge unsettles the idea of a fixed self. Morty does not feel like a singular, continuous person. He feels like a collection of moments stitched together loosely, aware that any thread could snap. This makes self-trust difficult. If everything can change, how do you rely on who you are becoming? Impermanence introduces doubt into identity. He begins to experience himself the way he experienced the universe, temporary, contingent, replaceable. This does not make him reckless. It makes him careful with who he allows himself to be. He hesitates before committing fully to any version of himself, afraid that investing too deeply in an identity might make its loss more painful. So he stays slightly unfinished. This unfinished state becomes another form of protection. If nothing is fully claimed, nothing can be fully taken away. Morty learns to keep parts of himself flexible, adaptable, ready to shift when circumstances demand it. Adaptability keeps him alive, but it also keeps him unsettled. Being unsettled becomes normal. When permanence disappears, stability must be constructed moment by moment. Morty looks for small anchors, routine, familiar spaces, repeated gestures that give shape to time. These anchors do not guarantee safety, but they provide orientation. They help him remember where he is, even when everything else feels uncertain. Attachment shifts toward the immediate. He learns to value presence over promise. Being with someone now matters more than knowing they will be there later. This makes his attention intense but fleeting. He listens closely. He notices details. He treats small interactions as if they might be the last. This intensity can be overwhelming. For others, it may feel like too much. For Morty, it feels necessary. Impermanence has taught him that moments deserve full attention because they cannot be revisited. There is no assumption of return, no guarantee of continuation. This awareness sharpens his sensitivity. He becomes attuned to shifts in tone, changes in mood, subtle signs of distance. He notices when something feels different before anyone else names it. Impermanence has trained him to detect endings early, sometimes before they truly arrive. This early detection does not prevent loss. It prepares him for it. Preparation is a form of emotional armor. It softens impact but never eliminates it. Morty still grieves when attachments end. He still feels the ache of separation. But the grief arrives alongside a quiet understanding that this is how things are. Understanding does not make it painless. It makes it survivable. Impermanence reshapes Morty's expectations of love as well. Love no longer feels like a promise of continuity. It feels like a shared moment of recognition, a choice to care despite uncertainty. He does not expect love to last forever. He expects it to matter while it exists. This reframing allows him to love without demanding guarantees. It also means that endings hurt in a different way. They do not feel like betrayal. They feel like confirmation. Confirmation that nothing escapes change. Confirmation that loss is not personal, just pervasive. Yet even with this understanding, there are moments when impermanence feels unbearable, when the constant erosion of stability leaves him longing for something solid, something that will not vanish. In those moments, he envies those who can believe in permanence without hesitation. He envies their confidence, their ease, their ability to assume continuity. But that envy never hardens into resentment. It softens into sadness, a recognition that he has crossed a threshold he cannot return from. He has seen too much to pretend otherwise. Impermanence becomes part of his emotional vocabulary. He speaks it through hesitation, through gentleness, through the way he avoids taking things for granted. He does not dismiss attachment because it may end. He values it because it does. Knowing that moments are finite gives them weight. It turns attention into care. It makes presence meaningful. This is the quiet paradox impermanence teaches him. When nothing feels permanent, everything matters more while it lasts. Morty carries this paradox with him, not as philosophy, but as lived experience. It shapes his relationships, his identity, his sense of time. It makes him cautious, but also deeply attentive. Fragile, but sincere. He does not grow immune to loss. He grows capable of holding it. That capacity does not make life easier. It makes it honest. In a universe that replaces realities effortlessly, Morty becomes someone who treats existence as something to be handled gently. Not because it will last, but because it will not. Impermanence reshapes attachment by stripping away illusion, but it does not destroy meaning. It relocates it. Meaning no longer lives in permanence. It lives in presence. Morty learns this slowly, painfully, without reassurance. And even as impermanence continues to erode certainty, he continues to attach anyway. Not because he believes things will stay, but because he believes they matter while they are here. That belief does not save him from grief, but it saves him from indifference. And in a universe where nothing feels permanent, that may be the most enduring choice he can make. Impermanence also changes how Morty experiences loss before it happens. Loss becomes anticipatory. It arrives early, quietly, woven into moments that should feel complete. When something good begins, part of him is already bracing for its end. This does not ruin the experience outright, but it alters its texture. Joy feels thinner, more delicate, as if it could tear if held too tightly. He learns not to grip moments. He learns to let them pass through him. This way of relating is subtle, almost invisible to others. From the outside, Morty may seem detached at times, less enthusiastic, less invested. Inside, the opposite is true. He is invested deeply, but he has learned that investment must remain flexible. Rigidity breaks when change arrives. Flexibility bends. Impermanence teaches bending. Morty bends around relationships, around identities, around expectations. He adjusts himself continuously, not because he lacks a core, but because he has learned that survival depends on responsiveness. Static things snap. Moving things endure. Endurance becomes his quiet goal. This endurance, however, comes with fatigue. Constant adjustment is tiring. Remaining emotionally open, while never assuming safety, drains energy. Morty feels this drain in ways he cannot easily name. It shows up as heaviness, as a lingering sadness that does not attach itself to any single cause. He is not sad because something ended. He is sad because everything ends. That awareness settles into his emotional baseline. It does not overwhelm him constantly, but it never fully leaves. Even happiness carries an undertone of awareness. Even calm contains a hint of vigilance. This vigilance reshapes how he rests. Rest does not feel complete when impermanence is always present. Even in stillness, part of him remains alert, attuned to change. The nervous system does not fully power down. It remains ready, waiting for the moment when stability gives way. This is not anxiety in the dramatic sense. It is preparedness as habit. Habitual preparedness becomes indistinguishable from personality. Morty becomes someone who expects disruption. This expectation influences his decisions, his tone, his sense of humor. He laughs, but softly. He hopes, but cautiously. He commits, but provisionally. These modifiers do not remove sincerity. They temper it. Impermanence also alters how Morty thinks about meaning. Meaning tied to permanence feels unreliable. If something must last to matter, then very little qualifies. Morty rejects this conclusion instinctively. He has seen too many meaningful moments vanish to accept that logic. so he builds a different definition. Meaning becomes intensity rather than duration, connection rather than continuity, presence rather than promise. This redefinition allows him to continue caring without demanding guarantees. It allows him to treat fleeting moments as sufficient. Enough does not mean eternal. Enough means real while it exists. This is a difficult lesson to live by consistently. There are moments when he longs for something stable enough to rest against, something that will not require constant recalibration, something that will simply remain. Those moments do not disappear. They surface when he is tired, when loss accumulates, when adaptation feels endless. In those moments, impermanence feels cruel rather than instructive. It feels like a theft rather than a condition. Morty feels the weight of having to accept what he never agreed to. Acceptance does not always feel like wisdom. Sometimes it feels like resignation. Yet even then, he does not fully give up on attachment. He does not retreat into indifference. He may pull back slightly, protect himself briefly. But the impulse to connect returns. It always does. Because attachment is not something he chooses once. It is something he chooses repeatedly. Each time he cares, he reaffirms that impermanence does not nullify value. Each time he invests emotionally, he pushes back against the idea that endings erase significance. This repetition is exhausting, but it is also grounding. It gives shape to his humanity. Morty's humanity is not defined by certainty. It is defined by willingness. Willingness to feel despite instability. Willingness to attach despite loss. Willingness to remain open in a universe that offers no reassurance. Impermanence reshapes attachment by stripping away illusion, but it also reveals intention. What remains when permanence is gone is choice. The choice to be present. The choice to care now. The choice to treat moments as meaningful, even when they will not last. Morty makes this choice quietly, without ceremony. He does not argue with impermanence. He lives alongside it. That coexistence is uneasy, but it is honest. It allows him to move forward without pretending that stability is guaranteed. It allows him to grow without demanding that growth lead to certainty. He grows into someone who understands that attachment is not about securing the future. It is about honoring the present. When nothing feels permanent, attachment becomes an act of attention. And attention, sustained gently over time, becomes its own kind of permanence. Not the kind that lasts forever, but the kind that leaves a trace. That trace is subtle. It does not preserve things the way permanence once promised to. It does not stop loss or prevent endings, but it lingers in quieter ways, shaping how Morty remembers, how he moves forward, how he carries himself into moments that have not happened yet. Impermanence teaches him that traces matter. Even when something disappears, it leaves an imprint, a feeling carried forward, a shift in understanding, a softness or caution that did not exist before. Morty begins to understand that attachment does not need to secure the future to leave something behind. It only needs to be sincere in the present. This realization does not arrive all at once. It arrives gradually, through repetition, through moments that end too soon, through connections that fade without explanation, through losses that arrive without warning. Each time, Morty feels the familiar ache, and each time he notices that something remains afterward. Not the thing itself, but the way it changed him, the way it taught him how to pay attention, how to be careful, how to feel without collapsing. Impermanence reshapes his relationship with memory as well. Memory becomes less about preserving what was and more about honoring how it mattered. Morty does not cling to exact details. He holds on to emotional truths. He remembers how it felt to care, how it felt to lose, how it felt to be present in moments that could not be saved. These memories do not comfort him in the traditional sense. They do not reassure him that things will return. They remind him that experience counts even when it cannot be repeated. This is a quiet form of meaning that does not depend on continuity, meaning that survives disappearance. Morty begins to trust this kind of meaning more than the promise of permanence. Permanence has proven unreliable, but impact remains. Impact accumulates even when the structures around it dissolve. This trust changes how he approaches future attachments. He no longer expects stability as proof of value. He looks for sincerity instead, for moments of genuine connection, for attention that feels real rather than guaranteed. This makes his attachments lighter, but also more intentional. He chooses presence over possession. Possession implies ownership. Ownership implies permanence. Permanence no longer feels honest. Presence, on the other hand, is always available. It does not require promises. It only requires showing up fully while something exists. Morty learns to show up this way, even when he knows the moment will end. This does not eliminate grief. Grief remains part of the process. It arrives when attachments dissolve. It arrives when moments pass. It arrives when something meaningful becomes memory. Morty does not avoid it. He allows it to move through him, aware that grief is the cost of caring in a world where nothing stays. Avoiding grief would require avoiding attachment. Morty refuses that trade. Impermanence reshapes attachment, not by erasing desire for connection, but by refining it. Desire becomes quieter, less demanding. It no longer insists on forever. It asks only for honesty while things are here. This refinement makes Morty's care easy to overlook. It does not announce itself. It does not cling. It does not demand reassurance. It simply remains attentive. Attentiveness becomes his way of loving, not loudly, not possessively, but with consistency that exists only in the present moment. He listens. He notices. He responds gently. These acts do not create permanence, but they create depth. Depth does not prevent endings. It gives them weight. When something ends, it matters that it was deep. It matters that it was real. Morty measures value by these criteria rather than by duration. This allows him to keep attaching even as impermanence continues to dismantle assumptions. He is still hurt by loss. He is still unsettled by instability. He still longs, at times, for something that will not change. Those longings do not disappear. They coexist with acceptance. Acceptance does not erase desire. It simply acknowledges reality without surrendering to bitterness. Morty walks this balance imperfectly. Some days he leans toward caution. Some days he leans toward openness. Some days he feels overwhelmed by the constant recalibration. But he does not stop trying. Impermanence has taught him that there is no final state of safety to arrive at. There is only ongoing presence, ongoing attention, ongoing choice. Attachment is not something secured once. It is something practiced again and again, in conditions that offer no guarantee. This practice becomes part of who he is. He becomes someone who values moments because they end. Someone who treats connection as meaningful, even when it is brief. Someone who understands that nothing lasting does not mean nothing matters. In a universe defined by replacement, Morty becomes someone who resists disposability through care, not by insisting things stay, but by ensuring that while they exist, they are treated gently. Impermanence reshapes attachment by removing illusions of forever. What remains is something quieter, harder, and more honest, the willingness to be present without certainty. Morty chooses that willingness repeatedly, and in doing so, he discovers a kind of stability that does not depend on permanence at all. A stability rooted in attention, in sincerity, in the courage to care even when nothing promises to last. That courage does not resolve the tension. It allows Morty to live inside it. Impermanence never becomes comfortable. It never fades into the background. It remains a constant condition, shaping the emotional climate he moves through. Some days it feels manageable, like weather he has learned to dress for. Other days it feels overwhelming, like a storm that arrives without warning and lingers longer than expected. Morty learns that resilience does not mean immunity. It means continued exposure without collapse. He does not stop feeling the ache of things ending. He does not stop noticing how fragile connections are. What changes is his relationship to that fragility. He stops treating it as a failure of attachment and starts treating it as part of attachment itself. This shift is subtle, but it matters. When something ends, Morty no longer asks only why it could not last. He also asks what it gave while it existed. This question does not erase grief, but it gives grief context. It allows loss to coexist with appreciation rather than cancel it out. Impermanence teaches him to grieve forward. Grieving forward means carrying what mattered into what comes next, rather than trying to preserve it unchanged. Morty does this instinctively. He absorbs lessons, feelings, and sensitivities, letting them inform how he shows up again. Each attachment leaves a residue that shapes the next one. This accumulation makes him more careful, but also more capable. He becomes better at recognizing when something is meaningful, better at distinguishing depth from distraction, better at noticing sincerity when it appears. Impermanence sharpens his discernment. When time is limited, attention becomes selective. Selectivity is not detachment. It is respect for limitation. Morty respects the fact that emotional energy is finite. He learns where to place it intentionally. This does not make him cold. It makes him deliberate. He invests in moments that feel real, rather than chasing permanence that never arrives. This deliberateness reshapes his inner life. He becomes less reactive to endings, not because they hurt less, but because he no longer treats them as proof that attachment was a mistake. He learns that endings do not retroactively invalidate connection. They simply define its shape. A brief connection is not a failed long one. It is its own form. This understanding allows him to remain open without demanding outcomes. He can attach without insisting on continuity. He can care without bargaining with the future. This frees him in small but significant ways. Freedom, in this context, is not escape from loss. It is release from expectation. Expectation had been a source of pain. Expectation that things should last. that effort should guarantee stability, that caring should be rewarded with permanence. Impermanence dismantles these assumptions, leaving Morty to rebuild his emotional framework from more honest materials. Honesty replaces hope for certainty. This honesty is sobering. It strips away comforting illusions. But it also prevents deeper disillusionment later. Morty no longer feels betrayed by reality when things change. He feels sad, but not shocked. The sadness is cleaner, less entangled with confusion. Clean sadness still hurts, but it hurts without bitterness. Bitterness would require believing things should have been different. Morty no longer believes that strongly. He believes things are different, constantly, inevitably. And that belief, paradoxically, makes room for gentleness. Gentleness becomes his response to instability. He treats people gently because he knows they are temporary. He treats moments gently because they will not repeat. He treats himself gently at times because he knows he is navigating something without precedent or guidance. This gentleness is uneven. He does not always manage it. There are moments when impermanence overwhelms him, when the cumulative weight of endings feels like too much. In those moments, he withdraws. He becomes quiet. He protects himself by narrowing his focus. These moments pass, not because impermanence relents, but because Morty adapts again. Adaptation does not mean improvement in a linear sense. It means continued adjustment, continued learning, continued recalibration. Life becomes a series of recalibrations rather than a progression toward stability. Morty accepts this structure reluctantly, but fully. He stops waiting for the phase where things settle permanently. He stops expecting a future that locks into place. Instead, he prepares for change as the only constant. Preparation does not eliminate fear. It reduces surprise. And surprise had been one of the most painful aspects of impermanence. The suddenness, the lack of warning, the feeling that the ground could vanish beneath him at any moment. Over time, Morty learns to expect movement. The ground still shifts, but he adjusts more quickly. This adjustment becomes second nature. Impermanence reshapes attachment by turning it into practice rather than promise. Something you do again and again, knowing it will not last, but choosing it anyway. Morty practices attachment the way someone practices a difficult skill, not to master it, but to remain capable. Capable of connection, capable of care, capable of presence. These capacities do not protect him from loss. They protect him from emptiness. In a universe where permanence is unreliable, emptiness would be the easier path. Detachment would simplify things. Indifference would reduce pain. Morty understands this option. He has seen it embodied. He knows what it looks like. And he chooses otherwise. He chooses to attach without illusion, to care without guarantee, to be present without permanence. That choice does not save him, but it keeps him alive in a way that matters. And as impermanence continues to reshape everything around him, Morty continues to respond not by hardening, but by refining how he attaches. Carefully, gently, again and again. That repetition becomes the quiet rhythm of his life. Attachment forms. Attachment dissolves. Something remains. Then the process begins again. Morty does not experience this as growth in the traditional sense. It feels more like weathering, like being shaped slowly by forces that never stop moving. Impermanence teaches him to measure time differently. Time no longer feels like a straight line leading somewhere stable. It feels like a series of overlapping moments, each complete in itself, each vulnerable to erasure. Morty stops expecting continuity to carry meaning forward automatically. Meaning has to be attended to while it exists. This attention sharpens his presence. He notices small things others overlook: tone shifts, brief expressions, the way someone hesitates before speaking. These details matter to him because they may not repeat. He treats them as singular rather than disposable. This makes his awareness intense, sometimes overwhelming, but also deeply sincere. Impermanence heightens sensitivity. Sensitivity, in turn, increases vulnerability. Morty feels exposed more often than protected. When you allow yourself to care in a world that does not preserve what you love, you accept a certain level of ongoing loss. Morty accepts this not because he enjoys it, but because the alternative feels worse. The alternative is numbness. Numbness promises relief. It offers insulation from disappointment. It simplifies attachment by reducing it. Morty sees that promise clearly. He understands how tempting it is. He understands how effective it can be. And yet, he resists it. He resists because numbness would flatten everything equally. Joy would diminish along with pain. Meaning would erode alongside fear. Impermanence would still exist, but nothing would feel worth responding to. Morty chooses vulnerability instead. This choice does not come with certainty. It comes with fatigue. Being present again and again without expectation of permanence is exhausting. It requires emotional energy that is never fully replenished. Morty feels this drain, even if he cannot articulate it. He becomes tired in a way that sleep does not fix. This tiredness is not physical, it is existential. It comes from repeatedly investing in things that do not stay, from caring deeply in a system that does not reward continuity, from adapting endlessly without arriving anywhere final. Yet even in this exhaustion, Morty does not stop attaching. He adjusts the scale instead. Rather than reaching for grand, enduring bonds, he focuses on what is immediate and real. Small kindnesses, brief connections, moments of shared attention. These do not promise permanence, but they offer presence. Presence becomes enough. Enough does not mean satisfying. It means survivable. Impermanence teaches him to accept enough, where he once hoped for forever. This acceptance is bittersweet. It carries loss inside it, but it also allows him to keep moving forward, without waiting for a stability that will not arrive. Waiting had become painful. Waiting for things to settle. Waiting for life to stop changing. Waiting for attachment to feel safe. Morty stops waiting. Instead, he learns to meet things as they are, to engage without projecting too far ahead, to care now without bargaining with the future. This does not eliminate longing. Longing still exists. It simply no longer dictates his behavior. Impermanence reshapes longing into something quieter. He still wants connection. He still wants stability. He still wants something that will last. But he no longer requires these things to justify caring. He does not withhold attachment until conditions improve. He attaches anyway, knowing the cost. This willingness is not dramatic. It does not announce itself as bravery. It feels ordinary, almost unremarkable from the inside. But it is sustained under difficult conditions, and that gives it weight. Impermanence makes every attachment provisional. Morty makes them sincere anyway. That sincerity accumulates. It does not create permanence. It creates character. Morty becomes someone defined less by what he has and more by how he responds, how he treats moments, how he handles endings, how he remains present even when things dissolve around him. This definition is flexible, not fixed. Flexibility becomes his form of stability. He does not anchor himself to outcomes. He anchors himself to intention. The intention to care, the intention to notice, the intention to remain open. Impermanence cannot erase intention. It can disrupt plans, dissolve structures, remove guarantees. But intention travels with him. It adapts. It reappears in new contexts. This gives Morty a continuity of a different kind. Not the continuity of lasting things, but the continuity of response. No matter how much changes, he continues to respond with care rather than indifference. This consistency becomes the closest thing to permanence he can rely on. In a universe that refuses to stay still, Morty learns to be the steady part, not by resisting change, but by deciding how he will meet it. Impermanence reshapes attachment by teaching him that nothing external can be secured. What can be chosen again and again is how fully he shows up while things exist. He shows up, not perfectly, not without fear, but honestly. And in that honesty, he finds a way to live with impermanence without letting it strip everything of meaning, even as things continue to end. Those endings never become neutral. They never stop registering. But over time, Morty learns that registering pain does not have to mean being undone by it. There is a difference between feeling loss and being defined entirely by it. Impermanence teaches him that distinction slowly, through repetition rather than instruction. He begins to notice that even when something ends, it does not vanish completely. It changes form. It becomes memory, influence, residue. The connection is gone, but the way it shaped him remains. The moment cannot be revisited, but it has already altered the shape of his inner world. This realization does not erase grief. It reframes it. Grief becomes less about what is missing and more about what was added. Something entered his life, mattered, and left a mark. That mark does not require the thing to continue existing. It exists independently now, carried forward inside him. Impermanence reshapes attachment. By teaching Morty to look for these marks, he begins to sense continuity, not in objects or relationships, but in himself, in the way he becomes slightly more patient, slightly more careful, slightly more aware after each loss. The world does not hold still for him, but he accumulates experience quietly. This accumulation is not linear growth, it is layering. Each attachment adds a layer. Each ending adds another. Over time, Morty becomes someone shaped by layers of experience rather than by a single uninterrupted narrative. This makes his sense of self more complex, but also more grounded. He is less likely to believe that one moment defines everything. He has seen too many moments end to give any single one absolute authority. This perspective protects him in subtle ways. When something goes wrong, he feels it deeply, but he does not assume it will destroy him. He knows now that endings, while painful, are survivable. He has survived many already. This knowledge does not make him fearless. It makes him resilient in a quiet, uncelebrated way. Resilience, for Morty, does not mean bouncing back quickly. It means continuing to attach despite knowing the outcome. He allows himself to be shaped again and again, to risk caring again and again, each time knowing it will not last, each time deciding that it matters anyway. This decision becomes less dramatic over time. It settles into habit. Caring becomes something he does without negotiation. Impermanence no longer stops him from forming attachments. It simply informs how he forms them. He does not cling. He does not demand. He does not assume. He meets people where they are. He values moments as they arrive. He lets go when they end, not cleanly, but without resistance. Resistance had only increased pain. Acceptance, while not painless, allows movement. Movement becomes essential. Staying still in a world defined by change is impossible. Morty learns to move emotionally as well as physically, to adapt without erasing himself, to release without becoming empty, to accept impermanence without surrendering meaning. This balance is fragile. There are days when he leans too far toward detachment, days when he pulls back, conserving energy, protecting himself from the constant cycle of forming and losing. On those days, he feels smaller, less alive, more insulated. Those days pass too. They remind him that insulation dulls everything, not just pain. And Morty, despite everything, still wants to feel alive. He still wants moments to register. He still wants connection to matter. Impermanence reshapes attachment by forcing this choice repeatedly. Do you care, knowing it will end? Or do you protect yourself by not caring at all? Morty answers this question over and over, sometimes differently, but always consciously, and more often than not, he chooses care. Not because it is safe, but because it feels true to who he is. This truth becomes his anchor. Not permanence, not certainty, but alignment. Alignment between how he feels and how he acts. Alignment between his sensitivity and his behavior. Impermanence cannot take that away. It can complicate it. It can challenge it, but it cannot erase it. As long as Morty continues to act in accordance with his capacity to care, something essential remains intact. That something is not optimism, it is integrity. Integrity does not guarantee happiness. It does not prevent loss, but it allows Morty to live without betraying himself. And in a universe that constantly undermines stability, that self-trust becomes invaluable. Impermanence continues to reshape attachment throughout his life. It never stops testing him, but it also refines him. It teaches him how to hold things lightly without dismissing them, how to let go without denying importance, how to move forward without pretending nothing was lost. Morty does not overcome impermanence. He learns to live with it, and in doing so, he discovers that while nothing stays, the way he chooses to care can still endure, not forever, but long enough to matter. That endurance does not announce itself as resolution. There is no moment where Morty feels finished with impermanence, no internal milestone where everything finally makes sense. Understanding does not arrive as clarity. It arrives as familiarity, as the quiet recognition of a pattern that no longer shocks him, even when it still hurts. Impermanence becomes predictable in its unpredictability. This familiarity changes how Morty approaches the future. He no longer imagines it as something stable waiting to be reached. He imagines it as a series of unfolding moments, each carrying its own weight, each deserving attention without expectation. The future stops feeling like a promise and starts feeling like a responsibility. To be present, to respond honestly, to avoid hardening. Avoiding hardening becomes intentional. Morty understands that impermanence can push people toward extremes. Some cling desperately, refusing to let go even when holding on causes damage. Others detach completely, protecting themselves by refusing to invest. Morty finds himself pulled toward both impulses at different times. He feels the urge to grasp and the urge to withdraw, sometimes simultaneously. Living between those urges becomes his reality. He learns to notice when he is clinging out of fear rather than care. He learns to notice when he is withdrawing out of exhaustion rather than wisdom. This awareness does not eliminate the impulses, but it gives him choice. Choice becomes his quiet form of agency in a world that denies control. Impermanence limits control. It does not eliminate choice. Morty cannot decide what will last. He cannot decide who will stay. He cannot decide which moments will dissolve and which will leave marks. But he can decide how he meets what is in front of him. He can decide whether to show up honestly or defensively, whether to treat moments as disposable or meaningful. This decision repeats constantly. Each interaction becomes a small test. Each attachment, a small risk. Each ending, a small lesson. Over time, Morty stops expecting these lessons to culminate in mastery. He understands that impermanence is not something to be solved. It is something to be lived alongside. This acceptance removes a layer of frustration. He stops asking when it will stop. He starts asking how to stay human within it. Staying human becomes the real challenge. Humanity, for Morty, means remaining sensitive without becoming paralyzed. It means allowing grief without letting it define everything. It means caring without demanding permanence, as proof that caring was worthwhile. This balance is unstable by nature. Some days he leans too far toward hope and feels the sharp sting of loss when things change. Other days he leans too far toward caution and feels the dull ache of missed connection. There is no perfect position, only adjustment. Adjustment becomes skill, not the kind that brings comfort, but the kind that allows continuation. Morty learns how to recalibrate quickly after endings. He learns how to recognize when grief needs space and when it needs movement. He learns how to sit with sadness without spiraling into meaninglessness. Meaninglessness is the greatest threat impermanence poses. When nothing lasts, it becomes tempting to believe nothing matters. Morty flirts with this idea in his darker moments. He feels its pull when loss accumulates too quickly, when attachments dissolve before he has time to recover. But each time, he pulls back. He pulls back because he knows the cost. Meaninglessness would flatten everything. It would make care pointless. It would make sensitivity a liability with no reward. Morty refuses that conclusion. Not because he can disprove it intellectually, but because living as if nothing matters feels worse than the pain of caring. This is the quiet conviction at the center of him. Impermanence reshapes attachment by forcing Morty to confront this choice repeatedly. Care or withdrawal, presence or detachment, engagement or numbness. He does not always choose the same way, but he always feels the weight of the decision. That weight keeps him awake to his own values. Values become more important when structures dissolve. When permanence cannot be relied on, internal alignment becomes the only stable reference point. Morty learns to check himself against this alignment rather than against outcomes. Did he care honestly? Did he show up fully? Did he treat the moment as meaningful? These questions replace older ones about success or longevity. They provide a different metric for living well in unstable conditions. Living well does not mean avoiding pain. It means avoiding indifference. Morty becomes someone who would rather be hurt than hollow. This preference does not make him fearless. It makes him sincere. Sincerity becomes his form of resistance against a universe that erases things casually. Impermanence continues to do what it does best. It ends things. It disrupts continuity. It refuses to offer guarantees. Morty does not defeat it. He adapts to it again and again. And through that adaptation, something unexpected happens. He becomes more himself, not a fixed self, not a permanent one, but a responsive one. A self defined not by what stays, but by how it responds when things leave. Impermanence reshapes attachment by stripping away illusions and leaving choice exposed. Morty chooses presence. He chooses care. He chooses to remain affected. Those choices do not create permanence, but they create a life that feels lived rather than endured. And even as impermanence continues to reshape everything around him, Morty continues to meet it with a quiet, deliberate openness, not because it is easy, but because it is the only way he knows how to remain himself in a world where nothing stays. That self is never finished. It does not arrive at a final shape or settle into something stable. Morty understands this now. Identity, like attachment, is provisional. It shifts with circumstance, with loss, with attention. Impermanence ensures that becoming is ongoing. This understanding softens his relationship with uncertainty. Uncertainty no longer feels like a flaw in the system. It feels like the system itself. Morty stops waiting for clarity that will never fully come. He stops expecting answers to arrive in complete form. Instead, he learns to live inside partial understanding. Partial understanding is enough. Enough to make choices. Enough to care. Enough to continue. Impermanence reshapes attachment by removing the illusion that certainty is required for commitment. Morty commits to moments without knowing how they will end. He commits to people without knowing how long they will remain. This does not make him reckless. It makes him honest about the terms of existence. Honesty becomes grounding. He no longer promises himself that things will last. He promises himself that he will pay attention while they are here. This promise is something he can keep. It does not depend on the universe cooperating. It depends only on his willingness to show up. Showing up becomes his practice. Some days he shows up tired. Some days he shows up guarded. Some days he shows up hopeful, in spite of himself. The consistency is not emotional tone. It is intention. Impermanence cannot take intention away. It can disrupt plans, dissolve relationships, erase environments. But intention lives inside response. Morty carries it with him regardless of context. It becomes the thread that connects moments even when nothing else does. This thread gives him continuity without permanence. Continuity does not require things to stay the same. It requires responsiveness. Morty becomes someone who recognizes patterns in himself rather than patterns in the world. He notices how he tends to care, how he tends to grieve, how he tends to adapt. These tendencies form a sense of self that persists even as circumstances change. This persistence is quiet, but real. It allows him to trust himself even when he cannot trust outcomes. He may not know what will happen next, but he knows how he will meet it. He knows that he will feel, that he will hesitate, that he will care. This self-knowledge offers a form of security, not the security of permanence, but the security of integrity. Integrity does not stop impermanence from hurting. It does not make endings easy, but it ensures that Morty does not abandon himself in the process. He remains aligned with what matters to him, even as everything else shifts. Impermanence reshapes attachment by clarifying what attachment is actually for. It is not for securing the future. It is not for avoiding loss. It is for allowing connection to exist honestly, without illusion. Morty accepts this function slowly. He still feels sadness when things end. He still wishes, at times, that something would stay. He still longs for rest from constant adaptation. Those feelings do not disappear. They become part of the landscape he moves through. Impermanence does not flatten emotion. It deepens it. Deep emotion requires care. Morty learns to pace himself, to pull back when overwhelmed, to re-engage when he has space. Attachment becomes something he modulates, rather than something that overwhelms him entirely. This modulation is imperfect, but it allows sustainability. Sustainability becomes important, not because he wants to endure forever, but because he wants to remain capable of caring. Care is his defining trait. Impermanence challenges it constantly, but it does not erase it. Each challenge forces him to choose again, to either protect himself by withdrawing or to engage with awareness of cost. He chooses engagement more often than not out of optimism, out of fidelity to himself. This fidelity becomes the quiet center of his life. It does not demand recognition. It does not resolve tension. It simply persists. Impermanence continues. Things end. People leave. Moments dissolve. Morty continues too. He adapts. He grieves. He attaches again, not because he believes in permanence, but because he believes that presence, however brief, is worth the risk. And in a universe where nothing stays, that belief becomes his way of staying human. That humanity does not shield him from wear. It accumulates it. Over time, Morty begins to feel the slow fatigue of living this way. Not a sharp exhaustion, but a dull, persistent tiredness that comes from staying open in a world that offers no pause. Impermanence demands constant adjustment, and adjustment requires energy. Caring repeatedly without guarantees drains something subtle but essential. He does not always recognize this fatigue when it arrives. It settles in quietly. It shows up as a longer pause before responding, as a deeper sigh he does not notice he is taking, as a growing desire for stillness in a life that rarely allows it. Stillness becomes rare when nothing stays. Even rest feels provisional. Even calm carries the knowledge that it can end without warning. Morty learns to rest lightly, the way someone rests when they know they may need to move again soon. This lightness protects him from shock, but it also prevents full recovery. Impermanence reshapes rest the same way it reshapes attachment. Nothing is ever fully settled. Nothing is ever completely safe. And yet, Morty does not stop seeking moments of quiet. He looks for them deliberately, even if they are brief. A familiar routine, a simple task, a stretch of time where nothing demands immediate response. These moments do not solve anything. They offer temporary reprieve. Temporary is enough. Enough to breathe. Enough to recenter, enough to remember why he continues to care. Impermanence teaches Morty that sustainability does not come from avoiding loss. It comes from learning how to recover between losses. Recovery does not mean forgetting. It means allowing space for feeling without letting it dominate every moment. This balance is delicate. Some days he tips toward overwhelm, some days toward detachment, most days somewhere in between. Living in between becomes normal. Morty stops expecting emotional equilibrium. He accepts fluctuation as part of the terrain. This acceptance does not eliminate struggle, but it reduces self-blame. He stops asking why he cannot just adapt once and be done with it. He understands now that adaptation is ongoing. Impermanence ensures that nothing is final, not even coping. This realization softens his expectations of himself. He allows for inconsistency. He forgives himself for days when caring feels harder, for moments when he needs distance, for times when he cannot fully show up. Self-forgiveness becomes essential. Without it, impermanence would grind him down completely. With it, he can continue imperfectly. He can remain human rather than efficient, sensitive rather than optimized. Optimization would require detachment. Morty refuses that path. He understands the appeal of becoming less affected. He has seen how effective it can be. But he has also seen the cost. The narrowing of experience, the loss of resonance, the quiet emptiness that replaces engagement. Impermanence reshapes attachment by making this cost visible. Every time something ends, Morty feels the ache. But he also feels the absence of ache in those who no longer attach. That absence feels wrong to him. It feels like a different kind of loss. So he accepts the ache. He carries it as part of caring, not as punishment, but as evidence that something mattered. This reframing does not make pain pleasant. It makes it meaningful enough to endure. Meaning becomes the counterweight to fatigue. When the tiredness deepens, Morty returns to this idea. That moments mattered. That care was real. That presence was not wasted just because it did not last. This belief does not energize him dramatically. It steadies him. Steadiness is enough to continue. Impermanence does not offer reassurance. It does not promise improvement. It simply continues. Morty continues alongside it, learning not how to conquer it, but how to coexist with it without losing himself. That coexistence is not peaceful. It is workable. Workable is sometimes the highest achievement available. Morty learns to accept workable instead of ideal. He lets go of fantasies where attachment is safe and rest is complete. He lives instead in a reality where care is risky and rest is partial, but still worthwhile. This realism deepens him. It makes his joy quieter but more deliberate, his sadness heavier but more honest, his connections fewer but more intentional. Impermanence reshapes attachment by stripping away excess and leaving what truly resonates. What remains is not permanence, but sincerity. Morty becomes someone who values sincerity above stability. Stability can vanish. Sincerity cannot be retroactively undone. Once something was sincerely felt, it cannot be made meaningless. Even if it ends, even if it disappears, even if no one else remembers it, Morty remembers. And that remembering, combined with his continued willingness to care, becomes the thread that carries him forward, not toward certainty, not toward safety, but toward a life that, despite everything, still feels lived. And as impermanence continues to reshape attachment, Morty continues to answer it in the only way he knows how, by staying open, by staying gentle, by staying human, even when nothing promises to stay.